the idea of the metaprogrammer, like being able to see or experience different realities very fully and then kind of program your own mind and your own impression.
The initial experiences can ignite something I call brain pleasure. And with self-aware nervous system comes with a shift of identification. You're no longer identifying just with the physical body. You're now a nervous system. You're now a brain. And you have a whole different level of operating procedures, ways of seeing, ways of moving through the world.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the Multiversity project. Today we have on Antero Alli. He's one of the main developers of the 8-circuit model of consciousness, along with Timothy Leary and Robert Anton Wilson. So drawing from his work in paratheatre, he's written 2 books, Angel Tech and the 8-circuit brain, and he's also designed 2 courses. The aim of these courses is to spur consciousness development according to the 8-circuit model, with an emphasis on embodied practice over theory, which is in stark contrast with many other thinkers in the consciousness development movement.
Yeah, and we took the course. We had some pretty powerful experiences, and we'll be talking about that later on this episode.
Yeah, and just so you know, we're not affiliated with the course in any way. We just genuinely think it's great, so wanted to have you on. So to start, Antero, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself, who you are, and how you came to work with the 8-circuit model of consciousness?
I remain somewhat unknown to myself, so I don't have any labels for that. But the way I came to the 8-circuit model was through a kind of a fortuitous, mysterious meeting with Robert Anton Wilson one day when my my friend invited me to go to a Discordian salon headed by this older guy named Bob. And this was way back in 1979. You know, like I'm an old codger of I'm almost 68 now. Anyway, we went to Bob's house, and he was there, with maybe a dozen other individuals. And he was going on about the puka, this giant invisible rabbit of Irish folklore. And it was all kind of amusing. I didn't really know what to think. I was, I think, 25 or 26 at the time. And we walk out, out of the house afterwards, and my friend says, well, how'd you like meeting Robert Anton Wilson? Now, the weird thing is that at the time, I was reading Bob's book, The Cosmic Trigger, and I didn't know that I was in Bob's house listening to Bob, talk about what Bob talks about. And so it kind of blew my mind. It's like, okay, this is some kind of synchronicity here. And then, after that, I kept attending the Discordian salons over the next couple of years, getting to know Bob a bit and kind of coaxing him to write the introduction to my first book, Angel Tech. And that is a book that's based on the 8-circuit brain model that I was first turned on to reading Bob's Cosmic Trigger, because he has a little section in there. It's not a lot, but it was just enough to attract my attention to this idea that intelligence could possibly express itself through way more venues than just the intellectual. Like he was talking about 8 functions of intelligence and how a person might increase intelligence. And so that was really fascinating to me, because at first I didn't believe it can be done. How can you increase intelligence? But over the years, it's been now 30 years or something or more, I feel and experience myself smarter now than I was back then. And I think part of it has to do with just, applying this, 8-circuit brain grid through a number of different experiences and different challenges and life events that have happened.
That's really cool. Yeah, it seems like part of what makes your approach unique or different from the approaches that came before is you're integrating it with paratheatre. Do you want to maybe introduce that concept a little bit?
Yeah. Part of the reason I felt compelled to write Angel Tech, and it was a really intimidating thing to do, because I was just like I said, in my late 20s, And like, who was I? I was a total unknown. What could I contribute to this model that Timothy Leary and Robert Anton Wilson had already developed in a very significant way? And then I realized that the books that they wrote, even though I got a lot out of them, I was inspired by them, there wasn't a whole lot of application. Like, how would I come to experience firsthand some of the states of consciousness that the Eighth Circuit symbolized? So I wasn't really interested in continuing this kind of symbolic understanding, this kind of armchair philosophical orientation, because my background was in theater, and so I decided to experiment with applying certain theatrical adjustments, certain ritual and physical theater processes for triggering some of the states of consciousness symbolized by the Eight Circuits. And I just kept developing and developing and developing that process, and always experimenting on myself. I mean, I became the guinea pig for all of the experiments. And I did that for about 4 years before actually writing the book. So when I wrote the book, all the various rituals and tasks and meditations, I had already applied them and experimented with them many, 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 many times over again. And I think that's partly why the book became popular at the time. It came out in the mid '80s, and it's still in print today. Paratheatre is a term coined by a Polish theater director named Jerzy Grotowski, who inspired me to develop my own paratheatre medium starting back in 1977. And it's a somatic self-discipline, combines methods of physical theater, dance, vocalization, and Zazen standing meditation to access autonomous forces in the body, in the internal landscape of the body, as movement resources. So it's really a method for excavating and exposing veins and sources of energy in the body that erupt then and then animate physical movement, gesture, sound, action, and even interaction. And this is something I've been practicing mostly in groups for 42 years.
Yeah, it was interesting. We tried no form, which is I think your evolution of Zazen meditation in the course, and I had some pretty interesting experiences. It was.
What happened to you?
I remember part of it. I'm paraphrasing here, but you recommend going through you're kind of like standing, but like your body's supposed to be loose. For the sake of the audience, I know you know that, but and you recommend going through like a mental process of I'm letting go of the desire to control the outcome, and then I'm letting go of the desire to control, and then I'm letting go of desire, and then you basically let go of the I, and try to become nothing. And for me, it was a lot of the exercises, I kind of had a mindset of a checklist, okay, done this exercise, and getting through this course kind of thing. And when I was doing the no form, it sort of prompted me to more get into a mindset of at first I was kind of doing that, okay, have I let go of desire yet? I check that off the list. But eventually I was able to sort of transcend that and get more into the actual, I did kind of feel at some point, almost like a release, whoa, I am letting go of control, or I am letting go of desire. And it felt just a huge relief. And I was just sort of started thinking, what if I could be this way all the time?
Yeah, it's a potent method. It's kind of a non-method because it's more of a kind of an undoing. You're relaxing the desire, relaxing desire to control, relaxing the desire to control an outcome. So it's kind of like an unraveling or kind of undoing. And the purpose of the no-form process is basically to cultivate enough internal receptivity so that you can begin detecting impulses, energy currents, shifting sensations that the body is always producing. It's always generating its own kind of responses to the environment, and whatever's going on. And as you get a little better with the no form, as you get a little better with emptying out, kind of hollowing out in a sense, you can begin accessing deeper layers of the body, what the body contains. And sometimes you tap into these kind of trauma points, places where, in growing up, you enter some kind of shock, whether it's from parents or from society or from other people, or just, you shocking yourself. And you have a chance of giving expression to the unprocessed trauma through movement, through vocalization, and so forth. And so there can be a kind of its own kind of healing process. And if you go deeper than that, if you get, more practiced in the no form, you can get down to a kind of more impersonal level, a kind of more archetypal or universal level, where you're starting to tap into patterns of energy and images and emotions that really don't belong to you. It's like that. It's not your story. All of a sudden, you become a vessel for the expression of, the story of the collective. Sometimes.
So that's like Circuit 7.
Yeah.
Yeah, speaking of the layers and the circuits, before we get too far, I was wondering, could you kind of briefly go through and define the 8 different circuits so that people listening have more of a concept of what we're talking about?
Okay. I was afraid you were going to ask me that.
Sorry.
That's okay. So the 8 circuits, even though they're numbered 1 through 8, it's not necessarily a process that's completely linear. It's not like you go from 1 to 3 and you just go, in a linear way. It does have a linear element to it, but it's also chiefly nonlinear, because you can have, upper circuits like circuits 5 to 8 active at the same time or even before the lower circuits are activated. So just with that said, circuit 1 refers to physical intelligence. It's basically, the body's instinctive reactions to the environment, and the orientation there is primarily physical survival. And getting better at that basically is the way you increase physical intelligence. You simply get better at surviving on the planet. Second circuit refers to emotional intelligence, and that kind of brings you into your own personal experience of the territorial instincts. What is it that you can actually call your own, and where it is that you project your territoriality into your environment, things that you call your own, sometimes misplacing it and trying to control other people, and, things like that. So second circuit involves power dynamics and, issues around control or not control. Third circuit refers to intellectual development, how we make sense of things, how we kind of create maps of the territory of our existence, how we explain things to ourselves and others. Circuit 4, called social moral intelligence. And so this moves us into the kind of intelligence we have in relating with people. Typically, your social intelligence can be measured by the degree of how many kinds of people you can get along with. Individuals that tend to get along with the greatest variety of individuals and human beings tend to have a higher social intelligence, and then people who can only get along with a very small group of people tend to have a lower social intelligence. And here the thing is that you can have, you see this all the time, people with really high third circuit intelligence, like they got this really high IQ intellectual quotient kind of intelligence, and they can have a really low social intelligence. They just don't get along with that many, numbers of people. So intelligence here is measured in really different ways with each circuit. And then going into circuit 5, what we call the upper circuits. And upper and lower doesn't mean like better or worse. That's the thing that sometimes confuses people. It's more about survival orientation. The first four circuits, physical, emotional, conceptual, and social, are more about survival orientation, as in physical, emotional, intellectual, and social survival. Circuits 5 through 8 are more post-survival, meaning once you've got your survival needs met, it's a lot, I think, easier and maybe more natural to start exploring post-survival experiences. And the Circuit 5 is simply your capacity for bliss and rapture and a high level of well-being, completely free of anxiety. Circuit 6, we move into psychic intelligence, and that brings you into those experiences of clairvoyance and being able to kind of start seeing through the lies and fabrications of society and social conditioning, and seeing through into the underlying dynamics of what it means to be human beyond our conditioning. So it brings its own kind of perspective and vision of things that becomes clearer and clearer. Circuit 7 puts us into a very different dimension where we come into, I think, at the baseline, an experience of the planet, of the earth, and of nature as a living, breathing entity that we come into some experience of being an expression of, like we're not separate from the planet anymore. It's almost like an experience where we are the planet. There's no difference between, people on the planet and the planet itself. And along with that, there are portals that open up in the Seventh Circuit to the dimension of autonomous archetypes. These are energy forms and energy patterns, God forms, etc., that have lives of their own, agendas of their own, that often in our dream life visit us, and we come into these certain kinds of dreams that are different than just dreams that we're processing our neurosis and stuff like that. But certain dreams are visitation dreams where we encounter such a strong presence of otherness in some entity or some person or some situation that they're really kind of life-changing dreams. So you wake up and all of a sudden, you feel different. Like what was that? That kind of dream. And so sometimes those kinds of entities that we experience in dreams will cross over into our waking lives, and we have these kind of large experiences of synchronicity and meetings with individuals that trigger all kinds of states of consciousness that we didn't know before, but somehow we can trace them back to certain encounters in the dream time. So the Seventh Circuit has to do with also dream time dimension, like the Aborigines of Australia. Their spirituality is grounded in Circuit 7. Circuit 8, as things get, weird, probably as weird as the Eighth Circuit brain can track of human experience, because it refers to out-of-body events where you come into experiences where you realize that you are much more than your physical body, and you come into an energetic body identification that a little bit like in the dreams, like when you go to sleep in your dream and you embody a kind of dream ego, a dream body that goes to adventures in dreamland, that kind of thing. So that starts in dreams in the Seventh Circuit, but in the Eighth Circuit, it moves up to a whole different level of strangeness and weirdness. And at the center point of Circuit 8 is identification with singularity, where all dualism completely is annihilated, and you come into, not just an experience of no form or the void, but you really come into an experience where you realize, oh my God, I am the void. Void as true nature. Oh, this is who I've always been. I am nothing, and it's not a problem.
Yeah, the "I am nothing and it's not a problem" was one of the quotes that really stuck with me from reading this book. Thank you for doing that. I know you said you didn't want
to.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. That's really helpful. I wanted to ask you specifically because when I was reading this, it seemed like you had a particular passion for exposing some of the pitfalls or focusing on some of the pitfalls of circuit 3, which I understand to be kind of like the rationalist circuit or like logic and reason circuit, like what a lot of people typically think of as intelligence. Circuit 3 is linked with circuit 7 in your kind of anchors and shocks model that you talk about. Could you speak to that a little bit? Is that true? Like, is circuit 3 like a thing for you, or?
Circuit 3 a thing for me? I think probably. So shocks and anchors, that's a phrase I use to describe what I've discovered as a way in which the upper circuits act on the lower circuits. They tend to act as shocks to the lower circuits, and ways in which the lower circuits act on the upper circuits when they act as anchors. And the way I'm kind of describing that is in very specific combinations. For example, I find that it's a lot easier and simpler to enter into circuit 5 when I have my circuit 1 survival act realized, when I'm no longer in survival anxiety, when I'm no longer worried about, rent or putting food in my mouth. I can start feeling a lot better just naturally walking down the street and come into some experience of well-being. That's when we circuit 5. So, and it goes the other way around too. So, for example, sometimes like smoking cannabis, for example, is a really great way to activate circuit 5. And so you smoke enough cannabis and all of a sudden, you can kind of feel scattered and kind of disoriented, like, oh shit, I missed that schedule, or I missed that boat, or whatever, I missed the appointment. And so then you can anchor your circuit 5 out of control experience of too much bliss by, cleaning the house or washing the dishes or doing the laundry, basic survival circuit 1 stuff, then can help stabilize that circuit high, because some of us get, let's say we have too much fun, or get too high. And so how do you anchor that? How do you stabilize that? So that's the basic concept of the shock anchor idea. And then circuit 6 acts as a shock to circuit 2, and circuit 2 acts as an anchor to 6. Circuit 3 acts as an anchor to circuit 7, and 4 acts as an anchor to circuit 8. It's kind of complex to begin with. It may sound kind of like, oh, there's a lot to understand there, and there is. But once you get the basic gist of it, it's actually simple, and it can be quite useful, especially if you're kind of a psychonaut kind of individuals into a lot of pharmaceutical experimentation, and you're activating a lot of the upper circuit stuff, and you're shocking yourself silly and not realizing that you're doing it. And then if you get some kind of useful tool to start stabilizing some of these high energy states that you're activating, your life becomes a lot simpler, a lot more manageable.
Yeah, that concept really resonated with me and made a lot of sense. I guess I was a little bit focused on 3 and 7 because at first it was hard for me to see the relationship. But one of the things that you said about circuit 3, which kind of struck me and made me think that you had maybe a strong emotional response there, is one of the headers in the book was "The mind is a liar and a whore," and the mind is concealing its bias and things like that. I found that section of the book to be really passionate And then circuit 7, which is more of like about the collective unconscious, archetypes, dream states, as we talked about earlier, is supposed to shock and be more related to circuit 3, like the rationalist state. Could you talk about that relationship a bit more and maybe how you see circuit 3 being overactive or something like that?
Oh, sure. Thanks for the reference of the mind as a liar and a whore. So that's actually the title of one of my films. I'm also a filmmaker. And it refers to kind of a circuit 3 or kind of a conceptual symbolic orientation that has been where someone is treadmilling in it, where they can't get out of it, where they're constantly looping in their head and they're overthinking everything and second guessing everything, and they just haven't found a way to link their intellectual orientation with anything, beyond itself. And so they kind of get trapped in it. And that trap, that kind of looping in circuit 3 over and over again, that's the mind that is a liar and a whore. Once circuit 3 is, once we, let's say are exposed to circuit 7 experience, we're exposed to some experience that kind of annihilates the sense of duality or annihilates the sense of observer and observed and kind of slam dunks us into this kind of cosmic unity or the experience of oneness and interconnectedness. The intellect is kind of put on stun. It's a bit of a shock to the intellect to be confronted with any experience beyond duality, because that's sort of how it functions, through comparison and associative reductionism and so forth. And so the intellect is shocked. It's undergoing some kind of trauma, trying to figure out what the hell happened there. How could I possibly experience something beyond my little mind? And yet sometimes that happens. Sometimes it just occurs. It can occur accidentally or, on purpose. It can occur through traumas, sometimes, it can happen through drug experiences, or you're breaking up with a lover, or you're evicted from an apartment, or it can happen in a number of different ways where all of a sudden your senses are blasted wide open and you're open to experiences that are quite unexpected and somehow tune you into a greater reality that, causes anxiety, because the intellect can't figure it out yet. It can't, it doesn't have the answer for it yet. And so, it goes into anxiety mode. So it's actually the third circuit. I'm not anti-intellectual at all. It's more like I depend on circuit 3 and the development of intellectual flexibility for my work as an artist and a filmmaker, because much of what I call art is really a product of an interaction between my intellectual capacity to find a kind of language to give articulation to circuit 7 experiences of archetypal nature that are literally beyond, the kind of language I was taught in school. So I have to, through my intellectual development, start, let's say, expanding my concept of what language is. I've also come to know DNA as a language. It's often spoken of as the universal language of life. So there's a connection there between the language of DNA or genetic intelligence and, the language of, that you speak in your local tribe, English, Spanish, Italian, or whatever. But there's also the language of music and the language of cinema, the language of images. And so I've come to, by expanding my concept of language and branching out into different ways of communicating with other people through image, through sound, through music, I've been able to give expression and transmission of Seventh Circuit experience through my art. So when people watch my films, and I'm saying not everybody's going to experience this, but some people will watch my films and they'll have some kind of life-changing moment, or they'll listen to my music and something will shift in them and they will tell me about it. And so it's that kind of process that I'm mostly interested in from an artistic standpoint, is finding ways to open up the playing field of creativity in Circuit 6, so it doesn't get locked into an over-literalist trap that so much that is, I think, predominant in the culture at large, is this epidemic of over-literalist thinking, taking things way too literally. And one of the consequences, kind of, I think tragic consequences, is that it puts a wet blanket on the imagination and eventually, kills the imagination. And it's the faculty of imagination, to me, that is kind of like the Circuit 3 intellect of Circuit 7. It's almost like if Circuit 7 had its own kind of thinking process, it would be the faculty of imagination, our capacity for generating images and creating images. And it's such an important piece. I mean, this is probably what I'm most passionate about in life, is the insurrection of the poetic imagination, because we live in an era where we're bombarded by so many images generated by advertisers and basically people who are, programming the chain of images, and so we become passive absorbers of the images of others, and we lose the capacity. We lose the capacity for creating our own images, and I think this is kind of very sad and tragic kind of thing. And so, people who are wanting to change that, they have to somehow find ways to resuscitate their imaginations from, having it turn belly up.
I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to the role of Circuit 6 in this. Because like when me and Katy read your book, we had kind of different understandings of your interpretation of Circuit 6. So maybe you speak to that a bit?
Yeah. Well, that's actually good news. We have different interpretations of the same, circuit. Typically that will happen. At its baseline, Circuit 6 refers to a specific way of paying attention, and it's something that I've come to call the second attention. And so the second attention means they're the first attention. And so the way I define these two attentions has helped me understand the baseline of what Circuit 6 is, I think, all about. So the first attention is that awareness linked to the thinking machine, to that process where we pay attention to something and we automatically label it and we automatically assign a meaning to it. It's all projected. The thinking mind is projecting the labels and the meanings. So this is kind of the attention that I think is more of the consensus model of attention. What I think the way most people pay attention is they can't stop labeling the things that they're paying attention to. They can't stop assigning their own meaning to it. So second attention is that awareness linked to presence, to phenomena, to energy, without assigning labels, without assigning any meaning whatsoever. So the second attention refers to more of a kind of interaction of seeing, simply seeing. So it's not assigning any labels. Now, the thing is that individuals, in mental institutions or insane asylums or whatever you want to call them, are house and home to a lot of individuals who are locked into second attention. They've lost their first attention anchor or way of understanding the second attention impressions. And I think they call that schizophrenia. And so, overemphasis in the second attention can also be dangerous. It can be, it can act as a kind of dissociative influence that makes it almost impossible to live in a society that's predominantly first attention oriented. And so part of the process of Circuit 6 is developing a kind of responsibility for finding, again, language or ways of using the first attention, not to dominate the second attention or to crush it or to oppress it, but somehow to find a way of talking or writing or even thinking that serves second attention experiences that somehow can. So it's a little bit like another way of understanding, Circuit 6 and second attention is intuition. And intuition is very difficult to define. It's not the same as instinct because it refers to a kind of unconscious intelligence process. People who are highly intuitive tend to know things very well, but they can't necessarily tell you how they know them. They just know them. And so that's kind of a Circuit 6 experience as well.
How do you see the second attention relating to the way that Robert Anton Wilson formulated Circuit 6, or in his case, he had 6 and 7 reversed, but the idea of the metaprogrammer, like being able to see or experience different realities very fully and then kind of program your own mind and your own impressions?
Well, I think, this is where Bob and I had, it's not like we had an argument. We didn't have an argument, but we have different opinions of what we call the metaprogramming circuit. And he thinks it's 7. I think it's 6. And with Circuit 6, the initial experiences where it starts first opening up for someone, can ignite something I call brain pleasure. So it's not the same as just physical pleasure, but there is in the brain its own kind of pleasure circuits that start activating. And this leads to a kind of self-awareness that's somewhat uncommon, because now we have a self-aware nervous system, a self-aware brain. And with self-aware nervous system comes with a shift of identification. You're no longer identifying just with the physical body. You're now a nervous system. You're now a brain. And you have a whole different level of operating procedures, ways of seeing, ways of moving through the world. It's just not as a physical robot anymore. Now you're in the position of the driver's seat. The brain and nervous system controls the physical body. And so this is, I think, the beginning of the possibility of metaprogramming, or kind of rearranging your own, reality and reality tunnels for those people that are motivated to do that, because it's certainly not something that everybody's going to be interested in doing, even those people who have opened up this Circuit 6. It takes a certain... you have to have a need to reprogram yourself. And if you don't have that need, it won't happen. Even sometimes when you feel like you have the need, you're too lazy to do it. So, there's that, possibility. So part of the self-aware nervous system, the self-aware brain, is capable of observing itself, observing the body from a very different perspective. It's no longer the body observing itself. It's now the nervous system observing the body, observing behavior, observing the conditioning that we've been subject to. And then you can begin through various processes, sometimes, with meditation, sometimes with rituals, sometimes with psychoactive drugs, of approaching what Timothy Leary called, and I think other people have called it too, a kind of peak imprint vulnerability. And in that peak imprint vulnerability, which is, I think, what naturally happens under the influence of a certain dose of LSD, you have the opportunity of introducing, new ideas, new beliefs, new values. And this is, I think, a big part of what metaprogramming is about, is exposing obsolete ideas, exposing obsolete beliefs, exposing obsolete belief systems, and replacing them with ideas, beliefs, outlooks, attitudes that express more of the truth of your own nervous system, basically.
That's really interesting. I'm sure we could keep talking about this connection for a really long time, but one thing I did want to ask.
We could.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No worries. One thing I wanted to ask you about is so there's a 4-8 connection, and I sort of see, looking around right now, with the coronavirus situation, circuit 8 is very much associated with death. There's something becoming nothingness. There's a death association there. And it seems like that's really present right now, this sort of increased awareness of death and mortality. While at the same time, I'm seeing sort of a weakening of circuit 4 connections. People aren't socializing as much, seeing their friends. People are more isolated. And I'm wondering if you see there potentially being a danger there.
Well, there's danger everywhere. The way I've come to see it, not so much like death so much. I rather like the word reset. It seems like a big part of the so-called social distancing, social isolation, is that the world, as we've known it, has stopped. There's a stopping of the world. And this includes the economic structures, the factories, the air traffic and everything. And then as the world stops, the planet revs up. The planetary energy has a chance to start regenerating, and we can see that in the clearer air and the clearer water and other kinds of weather patterns that are changing now as a result of less interference from the human plane. But on a personal level, I think there's a lot of different reactions people are having to spend more time with themselves. Some people are really happy about it. Some people are feeling, wow, this is the first time I feel like I've owned my own time. That my time has been owned by this company or that organization or that boss for so many years, and now I have my own time. Wow, this feels as close to freedom as I have ever felt. So a lot of people are celebrating that. And then there are other people who are more anxious about it. They have not come to terms with the state of uncertainty, which is a fact of real life. Unless you're constantly, buffering yourself from experiencing uncertainty still exists. It's a fact of life. And so we're in a time of heightened uncertainty, and people are becoming more aware of uncertainty. And some individuals are getting really nervous about that, more anxious. And then also a lot of people are becoming more creative in response to that. And I think this is a real key here, is to understand the state of uncertainty as a creative state. It's a reset button. It's a place where you have the opportunity to introduce a new direction in your life that was impossible before, because your life was too filled with the stimulation of the culture, the stimulation of society, the opinions and influences of other people, etc. But this kind of condition we're in now, it's almost monastic in a way. We're kind of set apart from the rest of society, and in a way, I think we've never, it's never happened before. It's unprecedented. And so I don't, the whole death part, I think, Circuit 8 is, to me, not so much about death as it is, I would say, more about liberation, the experience of, well, what is that? What does it mean, liberation? And I take that mostly from, even though I'm not a Buddhist per se, I've not taken any kind of vow on any, religion or whatever, but it's a common Buddhist precept for Circuit 8 experience is liberation. And, Buddhism in particular is a very social and community-based spiritual practice. So they are really in sync with that Circuit 4, Circuit 8 interaction. I recently made my film, my most recent film called The Vanishing Field, filmed it entirely in a Zen Buddhist monastery, like 4 or 5 months ago. And it's a story basically of 3 monks living in a monastery, and one of them, in his daily meditation practice, accidentally triggers a full-blown out-of-body event that really shakes him to the core. He wasn't really counting on having a full-blown out-of-body experience while meditating, but he did. He went right into Circuit 8 in a really big way, in a very dramatic way. And he was frightened by it, and he went to his Roshi, his spiritual teacher, and talked about it. And his Roshi was trying to calm him down and get him back to more traditional meditation practice to anchor him. And so there's this back and forth between out-of-body experience and meeting up with the Roshi and the community there. And, that I was exploring this, this relation between Circuit 4 and Circuit 8 through this, film story. And by the way, all my films are now posted online, for free viewing for anybody that wants to check that out. You go to verticalpool.com and, you find a link there to my films. So check that out.
That's great. Well, you were kind of talking about a lot of the positive aspects or things that are coming out of this coronavirus situation, like it's an opportunity for creativity and things like that. I think another way to see it, though, is maybe the coronavirus could be a Circuit 8 shock for a lot of people. And if Circuit 4 is not anchoring it, like maybe that's an explanation for some of the hyper moralism and extreme behavior that we're seeing these days. Does that resonate at all?
Oh, yeah, that's very perceptive, actually. I definitely can see the pandemic, as a Circuit 8 shock, and how that is really destabilizing Circuit 4, community bonds, social bonds, family bonds. It's a destabilization of our Circuit 4 experience. But in that destabilization is an opportunity again. And I'm more of an optimist. I gave up pessimism long ago. Didn't make my body feel as good as optimism, and I'm more of a hedonist than anything. So there you go. But the destabilization of Circuit 4 can allow. I'm not saying this is going to be true for everybody, because not everybody is, leaning towards optimism. But for the optimistically inclined, the destabilization, the social disconnect, again, creates a reset, an opportunity to say, okay, how do I want to re-enter the community when this, passes, whenever that is? What's my contribution? Maybe what I was contributing before was completely out of sync with who I am, and I need to kind of get more in alignment with what I'm about. So, when I get back into community life, when I get back with my friends, I can approach it more truthfully, with more integrity, with more of who I am, rather than what I was compromising my integrity before. And so there's a tremendous opportunity here in that destabilization. Now, of course, there's going to be all kinds of people that are going to fall into a kind of self-victimization trap, where they're freaking out and they're feeling sorry for themselves, and I have empathy for those people too, because a lot of people who go that route will commit suicide. They won't be able to deal, with the destabilization of their ego structures in a creative way. They didn't have the tools, or they didn't have the support, or anything like that. So, I have empathy for those that suffer that way, but I'm still going to stand with the, a more optimistic, kind of outlook to use these shocks as opportunities for re-imprinting, rearranging, redefining my reality. So, when I get back into community life, I have something more truthful to offer.
Yeah, I'm down with that. That sounds good. We did want to talk.
Easier said than done, though, right?
Yeah, I guess so, right?
Yeah.
I've been trying to secure my lower circuits during this period, and it's hard to not let things slip through the cracks. Let's leave it at
Absolutely. That. No, it's tough either way, It's like, the kind of tough that you can live with. I mean, if life is going to be hard this way or that way, which is the way that you can actually live with, it's not like it's ever going to be easy completely all the way through to the end.
Yeah, I guess if being a human was easy, everyone would do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so we did want to talk a little bit about our experience with your course before we close.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Like one condition for you doing this interview was that we do your course and have practical experience with the 8 circuits instead of just reading about them. So that was really cool. And we want to talk a little bit about how that went for us. One exercise that we both really want to talk about was integrity point. So in your book, you talk about, so correct me if I'm getting this wrong in any way, but like basically the idea is you try to find whatever it is in your daily life that you can get behind 100%, or that you feel committed to 100%, and then to like kind of access that energy and apply it to other things. Is that a good description?
That's right. That's the idea, and then the ritual of seeing how that works, if it works, and what happens.
Yeah. I found I had a lot of trouble locating my integrity point, or really identifying anything in my daily life that I could truly stand behind 100%. I found it almost like a circuit 3 maybe kind of thing, where like whenever I like think of something and I'm like wondering if I can stand behind it 100%, there's always a part of me that's like, well, there's this 10% of you that doesn't stand behind it. And so it was challenging for me. It was a really challenging exercise.
Well, it's a subtle, can be a subtle awareness thing. For example, I've encountered quite a few individuals that share your same story. What can I commit to 100%? I can't find anything. There's always this like 10%, thing that I can't complete all the way. Well, it's possible that you might have an integrity point around your capacity for doubt. Your skepticism. You might be 100% behind your skepticism. Or you might be 100% behind ambivalence or ambiguity. So there's a number of different ways you can look at the 100% thing, but you'd have to be completely brutally self-honest to kind of uncover that.
I took it as kind of a challenge because like Arielle, I had trouble identifying something when I actually like analyzed my own behavior, like identifying what do I stand behind 100% or something that I could use in that way and try to apply that energy. But the way that I took it was because I think one of the options was to have a belief or like an idea as an integrity point. And I decided to like commit to this idea that I do think that I have the potential to cultivate myself to be an exceptional person that does good for the world. And then like every time I found myself like procrastinating or doing something that didn't align with that, I was just repeating that to myself and saying like, am I committed to this idea 100% or not? I've decided to be committed 100%. And that's been, it's been helping me make some different decisions throughout the week.
Oh, cool. That's a great result.
It's been hard though.
Oh, yeah. The other thing too is that some people are just naturally more indecisive. You know, they don't like making decisions, or maybe they're challenged that way. So the indecision can sometimes be a person's integrity point.
Is it something like, I don't know, I was thinking that I really like reading fiction, and it's something that like I never have to force myself to do. I always just enjoy doing it, or like, and I'm able to get into flow. Like, is that something that's an integrity point, or am I sort of misunderstanding?
If you're 100% behind it. For example, every morning, for as long as I can remember, I've had 2 cups of coffee. Okay, so that is one of my integrity points. I totally don't waver there. It's like there's some mornings where I haven't had the coffee and I would be kind of bummed out, but typically every single morning. So it's consistent and I'm 100% behind it. I have no ambiguity there. And so it can be as simple as that. It doesn't have to be some big kind of thing. Sometimes it is a really big thing. You know, like some people have said, okay, I'm 100% behind taking care of my dog or my cat, and they're totally behind it. And then so they found it. So you really have to kind of just take a look at your daily life and to see if there's anything that stands out that you don't waver on. And then sometimes, again, you know, if you have someone that has cultivated a habit of wavering on almost everything, so maybe that could be their integrity point. Maybe they're just 100% behind wavering, because some people are like that, and then so that becomes its own kind of commitment. It works for some people. It doesn't work for me personally, but it does work for some people.
Okay. I'm noticing we're just about out of time. So I guess, does anyone have any like final thoughts in our last 2 minutes before we close this off?
Well, let's see. You did ask about paratheatre, and if anyone out there in radio land, internet land, wants to know more about my work in paratheatre, I've set up this massive archive website, paratheatrical.com, that features a number of video documents of some of the performances that we've staged, as well as some of the paratheatrical experiments, like non-performance events that we produced, and a lot of interviews and stories from people who've done this work, and also methods and principles that we've been applying over the years. So yeah, go to paratheatrical.com for the paratheatre. And if people want to know about my books and films and music projects, that's verticalpool.com.
Cool. Yeah, we'll put all that in the description.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, awesome. And go ahead, Katy.
I just want to say thank you for coming on, and I wish that I had not procrastinated on going through the course, because I ended up trying to go through a lot of it very quickly. But as soon as I started really immersing myself in it, I found it really, I don't know, some of the exercises have been really profound moments. So thank you for putting it together, and thanks for coming on.
You're very welcome. The course forums, of course, will remain open for another couple months at least. And you're welcome to enroll again. I offer discounts for people who come back, and people are coming back all the time, because there's no way you can really. I don't think there's any way anybody can finish the whole course, all the tasks and rituals and stuff, over 8 weeks. I think it's almost impossible unless that's all you're doing and there's nothing else that you're doing. So, yeah, hope to see you again there.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much, Antero. This has been really cool. And again, I also got a lot out of the course. Yeah, and thank you for those who've been watching. Hope you enjoyed this content. Again, Antero's resources will be found in the description. And if you like this content, please like, subscribe, and join us next time.
Thanks for joining us on the Multiversity Project. We hope you found this episode both mind-bending and enjoyable.
We can be found all over the social media space and at multiversityproject.co.
If you like this content, give us a like, comment, follow, share, or support us on Patreon.
Catch you on the flip side.